particularly miserable.
And there was lots of thunder and lightning.
And we don't live in Cape Town, do we?
No.
If you lived in Cape Town and you had the benefits, you can deal with the cold winter. But otherwise, no. Okay, let me just get...
Guys, is that little presentation of mine helpful? Do you want me to put it online? Please. Okay.
How did you feel about the answering of the questions about whether something is plagiarized and how you have to do reference? When you did that little bit of the assignment, how did you feel about it? Why is there such quietness? It can't be that bad. Remember that academic literacy? You had to do something. How did you feel about it? What was particularly difficult? What did you find difficult? It's important. What did you find difficult? It's not easy. But what did you find difficult about it? Put it in your own words. What else? Quietness. People aren't thinking, are they? It's really, really important. We'll go through some of that now. I don't want. If it is, and let's open it.
Okay, so while Dr. Ria is just busy here, when you register postgraduates, you get this little booklet, okay, but it's in a nicely bound form. But what I've done is I've made this electronic and I've put it online, right? So this is your Bible. Remember, Ria had that other Bible, but that one hasn't been approved yet. So this is the actual one that you get, and then I've also put the citation guide online. All right. Yeah. So these are for you.
Okay, so there are.
And then this you can give to the student that you think is the most deserving today.
Okay, the person that participates. You know how I find participation? You either sleep, anything like that, and men wear hats. I mean, wearing a hat in my class, if you're a male person, unless it's for religious reason, or you have actively a letter from your doctor that say that you have to retain your lice on your own head. Guarantees you for participation in the class. Okay, that was one of those little things that I have. There are no hats there. I saw that. I was quite. Yesterday, I nearly killed a group of third years who all claimed that they were cold.
Oh, so they all had hats on.
No, I think they, it was a fashion statement. When you start looking at it, they all had bad hair days. I didn't realize men had such bad hair days. But you see some of the students, their issues about their hair is massive. Okay. The reason that I put that little flag up in here is please note that a lot of what I present today comes from a variety of other sources. This is fundamental to academic honesty. What you do when you commit plagiarism, I don't know how much of it you've already been talking about, but we are going to have to maybe at some point put in a little bit more detail what plagiarism is. But plagiarism is the act of academic dishonesty. The word plagiarize comes from the word that means hijack or kidnap. So you have, in fact, kidnapped somebody else's thoughts or words. Now, there is nothing wrong about putting somebody else's thoughts into your work. That is what you have to do. You have to build from the knowledge of others. You've got to stand on the shoulders of giants. But you may not go around pretending that those thoughts are yours. Okay. You may also not use somebody else's words directly, even if you in some way say that this comes from them, unless you have the proper reference. So when you've got that word, it has to be in little brackets, and the whole protocol is according to your style guide. Now what that means, and it's really, really serious, is that we will be using a computer program with the name Turnitin. Turnitin means that the moment you hand in your document, especially assignment 4 where there's a lot of writing, and then your final proposal, the moment it goes in, it checks, it maps against anything that's available on the web. And it tells you that this comes word for word somewhere from somebody, from another source. It's very, very difficult if you use a lot of law, because law will automatically come out, but you can't go around paraphrasing law. Law is not really great for paraphrasing. So when you start verifying somebody that's used a lot of law, there's a specific process that your supervisor has to go through. It also picks up sloppy referencing. And I think we will go through more detail about exactly what will happen in plagiarism. But it is really, really serious. Should you be found guilty of plagiarism as a student, 1, you will certainly not get your degree. 2, you'll be kicked out of university. In fact, you will not be allowed to register at any other higher education institution in South Africa. If you finish your document and you find you get, you even get awarded your thesis, this doesn't mean it ends there. There's a number of cases, highly publicized cases, where people have been awarded a doctorate and then it comes out that there was plagiarism. Okay, maybe they wrote it 30 years ago when it wasn't possible to do these scans. But if it comes out, those people lose their doctorate. In some cases, these are full professors, very, very important professors all over the world. They lose their qualification, they lose their title, they lose their job, they lose their reputation. It is really, really a serious issue. So it is very important for you to be absolutely sure that you make certain that you are not using somebody else's words or thoughts without admitting to it. Now this is a presentation. I can get away with a little sticker like that. I acknowledge this is not my work. But in academic communication, of which your thesis is something, which any paper is something, there's a formal way that you do referencing. That referencing is so that anybody that goes through the work can see from which work you've been working and how you've interpreted that, and especially if there's a direct quote, that they can see where it comes from. Some of the horror stories that's even worse than these ones about how you've lost your work are those that go about finding out, sending your thesis in for examination and actually having plagiarized from your external examiner. Okay, that happens. You know, your external examiner sort of goes, read through this and say, you know what, I'm not marking myself. They tend to send really nasty letters, recommendation for severe action, and it also reflects very badly on your supervisors. So supervisors tend to be very, very neurotic about that. There's also cases where people have directly translated. They got something in German and they just washed it a little bit until it became English, or something like that. So it's really, really important. And we're going to talk about ethics, and then specifically about research ethics, but in the process we're going to talk about other few areas of concern. I'm not going to talk deeply about referencing. I think probably it would be better to use somebody in the library or somebody to use that, but I'll talk about some plagiarism.
I'm sorry, that library session has already happened.
Okay.
And that's the session that's online.
Okay, there's something online about referencing. Please make sure that you follow that. It is just plain ridiculous not to do that. One of the big problems is when you are struggling to paraphrase, to phrase something in different format, and what happens then is people who are not that comfortable in English struggle to feel comfortable in putting those words together. So they they get away, they believe that they'd rather use somebody else's work because it's better English than their own. Now, the way that you go through, for those of you that have read through it, you read somebody's work and you pick up, and it's maybe not very competent, but you pick it up and suddenly there's this absolutely impeccable piece of writing in the middle. That, you know, that makes your hair go up and you know that something really seriously has happened there. Ethics is around moral principles that governs your behavior. Ethics and research ethics is not quite the same thing, and we'll go through that. If you look at morality, ethics refers to standards and expected code of behavior. That's slightly different from morality, which really goes around a person's personal character and the kind of things that you do, which is morality, the way that you behave. It is unlikely to change unless you're one of the people that say, I've got a set of principles, if you don't like them, I'll change them, which is a statement that you often get. But most people have a very, very solid understanding of what is acceptable in their own right. Some people have a more flexible approach to that. And we see enough examples of that in our newspapers on a regular basis. But ethics is around the standards. Now, ethics isn't formally, this is a set of ethics and it will stay the same. We'll discuss how the Helsinki Convention has changed ethical expectations through the time. But for a specific body, there's specific ethics. Any of you lawyers? What happens to lawyers that don't follow the ethical codes? Struck off the roll. What happens to medical doctors that don't follow the ethical codes? They bury the patients and they get struck off the roll, hopefully. Okay, so there's specific behavior, and there's something that would, now I mean a lot of us would go around to say, a lot of the things that lawyers do is, in my mind, immoral. But it's still within their codes. And that's really the difference. We're not here to talk about morality. I know a lot of you can have different views on that. We're talking about research ethics mostly. But we're also talking about other professional ethics. So there's two views, and inherently you'll find that in yourself you have a specific view. There's one view, which is the deontological view, that basically say nothing ever justifies unethical behavior. Full stop, you don't do that. And there's a teleological view that says sometimes the end justifies the means. No matter what your personal view is, it is really important to understand that the consequences for unethical research is massive, both for you and for the institution. Okay. Professional ethics. Academics, for those of you that are currently academics, that are aiming to become academics, or if you're a doctoral student, somehow in your life you might just become an academic. I certainly didn't intend to become an academic initially. I drifted into the area from industry. Some people start there and move out. There are career academics, there are people that move up and down. But the professional criteria for academic is very serious. And if you do not follow that, it's not as simple as getting disbarred. You get fired. You probably get fired quite publicly. And ever getting a job again as an academic is virtually impossible. Anywhere in the world, because academics talk. Okay? And more than that, it brings your students into discredit. Anybody that you have supervised, everybody will wonder, you know, how did that then go if this person was dishonest? So from an academic professional area, it's very important to understand that as well. But even if you're not aiming to become an academic at this point, at some point or another, it may be where you end up. And it's important to understand that. You have to understand your ethical behavior not only on how you do the research, but also on how you report the research. So traditionally, what we talk about research ethics, we will be talking about the process of doing the research. But there's also serious ethical implications in how you report the research. One of the things that you'll find, we'll use examples. I can use wonderful examples of one of my BTech students that did research on, alleged research, I'll say, on safety and health problems, violations. Asked him later what happened, and he said no, they've successfully had disciplinary actions against anybody that they interviewed and found out to be unethical or haven't had a violation. Now this can't be research, because if you go around telling somebody you're doing research and they talk to you and then there's consequences, it puts everybody else in a problematic area, isn't it? Nobody else is going to gain access for information ever again. So you can only call that alleged research, because if it's called research, the consequences for everybody else is also there. So everybody that muddies the water causes problems for everybody later. So it's very important. It's not only about yourself. There's a long set here. So, fun and games. Academic cheating. Academic cheating is not strictly, or academic dishonesty is not strictly under research ethics, but it's very, very important for you to understand. The first thing is straight plagiarism. Okay? You pass off somebody else's work or thoughts as your own. The next one is fabrication and falsification. You go around and you pretend that you've got information that says something. So you just add a little bit of data in there that looks better. Now, and students, especially in your first degree, and you have to do these experiments, and you know you're going to do these experiments, and you really want to do something else. It's very often for a few extra data sets to come in when you're supposed to have sat in the lab for much longer, isn't it? These things happen. And the first thing you find out, if those data sets are too accurate, then you know that it's unlikely to have come from real experimentation. But when you start doing that as an academic and you start reporting things, or even in your research, you follow all the ethical processes, but at one point you see, oops, this data set is a little bit thin. I'm going to pad it with some more. That's when you start falsification. There's very serious consequences for that. Then there's deception and providing of false information. There's cases that you don't want to tell a person that you're doing research on something because they will respond differently. Okay. So it's very, very important that you can more or less lock yourself into a specific job for a while, just so that you can get the data, even if it becomes really impossible for you, or that if you lose your job, if there's retrenchments or anything, you lose everything. The other thing is that there's a lot of bias and there's a lot of potential ethical concerns about gathering information where you're in a position of power or where you have certain effect on what is happening. So when you want to do that, please be very, very certain that that's the best option for you. It's a specific area of concern. Then, of course, there's bribery. Now, there's a variety of forms of bribery. Sometimes you would give people, you have a focus group and you have lunch. Okay? Is that bribery? It could be if you have a focus group with some rural community and you pay for the transport and you feed them. And they know that if they have really participated well, they're going to be invited again. So they're going to give you what you want to know instead of what you should know. Isn't there a possibility around that? When you pay student for participation, if you do something like medical experiments, very often you pay students, but that has only to be a compensation for their time, not for anything else. You can't pay them to fill out a form. Marketing research is regularly done. Okay? Do this, fill out this form, and I'll give you so much money. But in academic research, that becomes an issue. And we have to look at it. And that's beyond the forms of bribery that occurs that even can include sexual harassment in academic area, where you want your marks adjusted based on the charmingness of your personality and or body. Okay.
Why do you use the charmingness of your personality and your body body to get someone to fill in the questionnaire.
Oh, I know of those, you know. It happens when you have these groups, these honor students group, and they often work in groups. They send the person that looks the cutest to go and question. You want to talk to people on a construction site. Obviously, the best way to get that answer is to send the youngest, cutest girl wearing the most appropriate clothes.
No, the most inappropriate.
Appropriate clothes for the situation. I was not talking. And that becomes a problem. That is a massive, massive problem. I know of people that even at doctoral level does that. It's one thing to dress in a way that facilitates communication. For example, if you are going to interview people that you know are strictly Muslims, don't go around showing your arms, having half your body hang out. This is respect. Facilitate, wear clothes that are appropriate for business environment. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you deliberately try and entice answers, you are creating bias. People may want to, instead of giving you the truth, start giving you something that makes you happier. And that's not research, isn't it? So there's some real issues there. But beyond that, there's the issue of plagiarism. Okay. Plagiarism is a very, very difficult area to deal with. There is absolutely blatant, deliberate plagiarism where people go out and they take a book and they just rewrite it. Or they take an article, they find some article in a language that they understand, and they rewrite parts of it and they try and pass it off as their own. That's absolutely deliberate. There's also a lot of people that do it from websites, because it used to be quite difficult to find out what somebody wrote on a website. Somebody wrote a particularly nice bit, you copy and paste it, and that website is gone a few weeks or whatever later. But currently, if you put it through Turnitin, it does pick it up. And it tells you exactly on what website, what words exactly, everything in there. It's a very, very potent form, and you will probably see your Turnitin reports very, very soon. But it does pick it up. You can also copy and paste from a number of sources. You know, this whole copy and paste, and you put a few words, and then you put a few words in to try and link it. There's a very allegedly sophisticated form that some students use. They take a set of electronic information, whether they've copied it from an article, push it through a translator that way, and push it through a translator that way, and then reword it in an effort to get away with paraphrasing it. But it's still not sensible. So one of the things you have to do when you read it, those notes that you make, that's when you start rephrasing and thinking about it. If you can only copy, one of the things is, never mind their own words, if you can only copy what somebody does, you're really not at a postgraduate level. You have to be able to use your own thoughts and your own words to articulate something, because it shows the way you think. And a lot of a master's and a doctoral level is about proving that you can think, more than anything else. Then there are people that buy papers. I mean, there's a very healthy industry going around. You want a master's, you go and rent a few people that sit around there and do masters. That's what they do. You pay your money, you tell them the topic, they bring it out. There it is, your master's. Okay. The problem with that, beyond anything else, is that they're not always that good. And how do you know that they're actually going to quote correctly and things like that? Never mind anything else. You get them to problems about something. You say, no, it wasn't me that did this plagiarizing. I bought it. I didn't know that it got. I've heard of that. So,
if you Google buy a master's paper, you get 240,000 hits.
Okay. One of the reasons we go through this kind of processes is that we record your thoughts. In your file of evidence, it's clear that you have been thinking, and your supervisor can actually, there's a record. This is the way you thought. And it makes it much easier. Even if accidentally there's something that overlaps, you can see that this student, this candidate, has slowly been forming their own thoughts along this way. But it's also unfortunate that sometimes you end up with plagiarism when you haven't intended to do that. You really didn't intend to do it, but you didn't know how to cite. And that's one of the things we try to test in that academic literacy thing. You literally went and you think you referred correctly, but you didn't cite your whole way that you constructed the sentence. You didn't use the correct punctuation, and it doesn't recognize. Because if you use the correct punctuation, Turnitin picks it up as quotation, and they don't get upset about it. But if you don't use the correct punctuation, they pick it up, you have copied somebody else's word. So a lot of what comes out is your sloppy referencing, your sloppy citing ends up showing up as plagiarism. If you don't know how to paraphrase or summarize, if it's difficult for you to take something and rewrite it in your own words, and you're feeling slightly uncomfortable about language use, you can also fall in that trap. So if you find that you have difficulty in doing that, it is worthwhile to get help. There are people that help you with language, and you start doing exercises about rewriting and paraphrasing. There's books that help you. There are, I don't know if there's a language grouping here probably also
Yes,
that could help you with that. It is worthwhile to do that. Obviously, nobody expects you to be able to write impeccable English. I can't, certainly. Beyond spell checker, I regularly have to have somebody just go through to find out where I've murdered some form of tense or anything else. But, yeah?
Just a question, if you paraphrase,
Yeah?
but you don't cite, that is then plagiarism.
You paraphrase, but you don't reference. You paraphrase, then you reference. It's somebody else's thoughts that you're putting in your own words, but you have to put in there, I get it from this guy said so. Surname, date. Surname, date.
Sorry, if I can just interject. The important thing is before you start writing, switch on your grammar and spell check and set it to South African English. Right. Because that's not going to take the plagiarism away, but it's going to help you to a large extent to pick up spelling and grammar errors. Because if I get a paper from a student and they haven't set on the language editor, I get really upset because that's a tool that can help you to write better.
And American English, it is not accepted. It is a version that allegedly has the term English in it, but it is not English. Okay? It's not the Queen's. I'm actually quite nasty. I prefer UK English, but we'll accept South African English. Okay, some people accept it. For the purposes of that, most of your supervisors will accept it. If they don't, they will share that thought with you pretty quickly. I also know of some supervisors that insist that whatever you give to them has already been professionally edited. If you're doing your doctorate and you hand in your final document in for examination, it is definitely worthwhile to get a professional editor in. However, that editor is not there to create your thoughts. Okay? They can't rewrite the things so that it makes sense. If you can't make sense of it, obviously you don't know. And it could be quite expensive, but there's a variety. I mean, if you look on the boards.
Sorry, if I can just interject before we go on. In the TUT system, TUT will pay for your final editing and your final binding of your documents. I think it's up to an amount of 10,000 rand. So your binding and your editing has to fit into that 10,000 rand.
Okay. But editing is important because that document is, at this point, nobody's doctorate gets away without being turned into electronic document and going on the great depository in the clouds, and everybody else that quotes from you and don't do it appropriately will also get shown up. And you don't want your name associated with some sloppy English. And your supervisor certainly doesn't want that either.
But what happens when you run your own thoughts and later on as you continue with your literature review, realize that there are various authors who share the same views.
Then you reference, then you put in, this is a view. Originally you thought it was quite unique, but then you have to put in those references. That's when you have those little brackets that said Smith 2005, Nkomo 2007, all those things. These people agree with you. Are you at a master's or a doctoral level?
Doctoral level.
At a doctoral level, in the first bit of your, especially your introduction, and at the part where you're dealing your literature, you want to have support that other people, you know, this is a very solid thought, other people also thinks it. It's only at the conclusions where you put your things together where it has to be your own. If you find the same thing there, you've got a problem. But in everything else, that is quite fine. But you have to keep record of that. Okay. Now, but unfortunately,
But then if it happens that you submit and then you pick it up as plagiarism and I didn't get it from anyone.
that is where it's not, you don't get killed based, you know, it's not put your head down on the block, here comes a sword. If you've picked up and turn it in, there's a whole process behind it. And one of the reasons why it's safer for you to follow a process where you have records of all that you've thought, it proves that it's not something you've picked up. But the other part is also, we don't want a paragraph with a certain thought that's very popular and have approximately 500 references in there. Okay. So when it's a thought that is shared by a lot of people, you want to have a few, I think most people prefer not more than 5, I don't know how many you want, of the most pertinent, key, newest, or seminal thoughts about that. Okay. So the other thing is, there's a lot of issues about what is common knowledge. If you've read quite a lot, you might write something down as a fact, because common knowledge you don't have to refer, and you think it's common knowledge, but it's not really common knowledge because it's very specific knowledge to a specific area. So sometimes people get caught up because they use phrases or ways of putting things together that they think is common knowledge. Now, one of the problems is you read and you don't know how much you read, and somewhere you got to turn a phrase, half a sentence that really, really describes this well, and it becomes part of your own vocabulary. So, and you can't even remember where you picked it up. So it's very important that this is something that could be plagiarism, but it's accidental plagiarism. The onus is on you to prove that it's accidental, and you don't really want to go there. So there's a certain percentage of plagiarism that you can say, okay, this is accidental, but if it gets too high, then questions are asked. So the interpretation with either Turnitin or any one of the other, there's a lot of interpretation going in there, and you have to have a lot of evidence. And you don't ever want to be in a plagiarism hearing. No. It is not pleasant for anybody. It's really horrible. And then, of course, people...
Sorry, and we will be doing Turnitin training with the supervisors as well. So they will be on the same page as we are in terms of what is plagiarism.
Okay. So that will be straightforward. Also, recycling old paper. When you go through there, what are you putting in, what you're not putting in? For you, the one area that's really difficult is when you start milking your thesis for literature, for writing papers. It's very difficult to make sure that what you put in that paper is not in fact a direct copy of your thesis. And that's why writing a paper is not just cut and paste your chapters, unless the form of doctorate that you do requires you to bind a number of papers. But
We don't do that.
you don't do that. Okay.
Dr. Kristen, during literature review, if I found a format or a structure of a proposal done by a previous student,
There will be a structure of a proposal coming up for you very soon that is going to be developed, I think. It picks that up as well. And that's why the interpretation is so important, that somebody can go, but this is the way it works. Very often if you give people templates, all of you will have a certain level of plagiarism because it will refer to the template and say, oh, you're using that template. So there's a lot of interpreting that goes into it. It's not, you cannot say, I put it into it comes out with the 20%, therefore you're bad. There's got to be interpretation. If you look at it, those are just a few guys that have been picked up that were found guilty of plagiarism. Now, can you see that crossover professor? They were professor before it. They're no longer. So if you look at them specifically,
Sorry, the person take you back. How much can one cite from the whole document? 50%, 20%, 10%?
Allowable
Citations.
similarities.
sorry?
Allowable similarities.
Yes.
There's no hard and fast rules about it. There's no hard and fast. There's no hard and fast rule about it. But if you copy if you bring out a large section of one paper, it becomes difficult. I mean, you don't want to basically rewrite somebody else's paper. It becomes really, really difficult. I feel uncomfortable at above more than 10%. I don't know how you feel. So but there's no hard and fast rules. About plagiarism, the big thing is if we can find something to automatically check for it, it will be great. But there is a lot of interpretation, and that's why these processes are so difficult. If you get found guilty, it means that there was really serious proof. So one of the these are the professors that got dismissed. The one guy was dismissed in 2005 after it was found that something he published in 2004 in the China Media Report was plagiarized. There's some guys, Ward Churchill, and now if you go back to him, he's at the University of Colorado. Numerous, he was. Multiple counts of plagiarism, fabrication, and falsification. There's cases where if a guy was found guilty about plagiarizing a paper which formed part of the thesis, the student's degree is also revoked. This is one of the cases where the consequences was quite serious. This guy's Professor Chabedi from Wits, very close by. So there's a whole lot of these issues that happen. Yeah?
Can I ask a question? All those professors have already published something. What happens to me if I come to them and they have been
No, I think that as long as you quote where you found it directly, I don't think it is possible for us at this point to find out if that person has been discredited, and it cannot be expected of you to know that. Okay. But it's a very interesting question, so I will think about it seriously. Okay, so plagiarism, we're not going to go in detail, but it's very important to remember it. The next point is around gaining access. How are you going to get to wherever you're going to use the data? Okay, let's look. You're looking bored, the gentleman with the brown shirt there in the middle. Yes, you. What are you going to work? I want people to start talking about their own work. The moment you start talking about it, it becomes easier. So, what are you going to do, and where are you going to get your information?
I'm going to do my research on cloud computing.
Okay.
So most of the stuff we do it online, but there's a couple of folks that I'm currently...
But your data, you're just going to do it? Are you going to talk to anybody? Are you going to get information, or are you just going to model things?
No, I'm going to research from a couple of companies within South Africa.
Okay, which companies?
Well, mostly the one that focus on IT and the one that comes with IT solutions. And how far South Africa have we gone?
Okay. Are you going to get access to them?
Well, I've got a couple of friends who are in the
We'll talk about that now. It's important because a lot of what you do depends on where you can get the data. I mean, it could be a perfect question, it could be beautiful research, but you can't get hold of the data. That's why the access is so, and you giggled, so tell us about yours. the guy with the blue ball shirt that is obviously going to be watching rugby this afternoon. So,
Okay, but in my side, I've got a little bit of a challenge, in a sense that my research is based on the implementation of quality tools within an NGO environment in South Africa. But the situation is that there's few of the articles that are talking about those quality tools, especially within an NGO environment,
yeah.
which is those tools are available within the private sector,
Yeah.
like the manufacturing sector, the mining sector, and so forth. What is basically happening at this point in time is that I normally use a lot of books from the library
Yeah.
that are talking about that, and there's few of the articles as well, but not locally, internationally, from other countries that
Yeah.
have done more or less the same thing, but not exactly.
That is still fine. That's your problem. But if you're going to get information for your own empirical research, who are you going to talk to? Who are going to do the questionnaires?
At this point in time, we go to Kleptown. We've done some, actually, to be short and to the point, we are talking to Kleptown Youth Program, that is the NGO environment.
And you have got ethical clearance, have you? Already? Have you got ethical clearance through the university?
Not yet.
And you are gathering data?
That was,
Okay, you are only negotiating access yet.
yeah, that's what is happening now.
Okay, and we talk about the difference, but gathering data becomes the issue. Anybody else have an exciting access issue?
Doc, in my case, I'm working with supply chain in municipalities.
Yeah?
I'm currently an advisor at the Development Bank, and we have about 90 municipalities that's part of an improvement program. And I'm hoping to use
Okay,
those
but
90 having access to the mayors and the MMs and the
okay, but the issue there is also an issue of power relationship. Is there some form of coercion? And in your case, may there be bias? Because of whom you are.
Nationally, in all 9 provinces.
Yeah, no, but because they know who's asking the questions. You know, that becomes a reality. Where the guy with the blue jersey over his shoulder.
I haven't really started with the problem, but I was thinking to look at the problem in the project sector, to try to find out exactly what caused most of the project to fail.
Aha, but that's over research. Doctoral masters.
Masters.
Ooh, very careful, okay? Because you've got to be very specific. Project failure, how many, is it your student?
No, but the thing is that there are a lot of gaps.
Yeah. So it's finding that gap specifically is going to be issue.
And with project success and failure, the current literature says that we don't know what it is yet. So,
Okay, now, what you want to investigate project failure, okay? Who's going to talk to you about their failure? Because that's one of the big things. So you want to have failure, and I mean, if you come and talk to me afterwards, and why did this fail? You think I'm going to be honest? I want to display my dirty laundry to you, and you're going to publish the name of the company and the project. So yeah, but I'm saying this is some of the issues around access. So getting access, or even if you go ethically around it, one of the first things that you have to do as part of your ethical process is you have to have an introduction document that you take to whoever you want to participate. This is what it's about, and company, if you participate, you will get access to the findings, not my raw data, and I'm certainly not doing industrial espionage by giving you the information of your competitors, okay? But what is going to happen afterwards? So getting access is quite difficult. Retaining access is even more difficult. You know, there's a lot of people that initially will tell you, okay, that's cool, and then they see what you find out and they say, not a chance. Okay, so, and that makes it very, very difficult if you're doing research for academic qualification, because you don't want somebody saying, what about it later? So thinking about access is very, very, very difficult. And your ability to do research depends on that. There's physical access. So one of the things is knowing the people. These are gatekeepers or brokers. So if you use a gatekeeper or a broker to gain access, what is implied with this? How much favors is being brought in? What is being put in place? And can that gatekeeper actually guarantee you access? Do they have the legal right within that company or that organization to say, yes, you have access? Because you don't want any consequences later that you've been a spy. Because that's what you have if you've got no permission, you're a spy. You're not a researcher.
Okay, and also in the TUT process, if you are focusing on a specific organization, you need, in your appendix of your proposal, you need proof that you have access.
Permission, we'll talk about those. This is one of the pieces of documentation. So the first is to understand.
So I just want to find something, just going to the same, we were just talking about spying. For instance, if I'm working at TUT and I want to do a research in another company, apart from my workplace, can that company that I want to investigate suspect me that I want to steal their information?
Yes, of course they will, and that's one of the main reasons they may deny you permission. That is why the process that you go through for application, your own process, your own ethical clearance. In many cases, that organization, say for example, you want to do work in a hospital. Not that you will be given opportunity very often because hospitals are medically cleared and they get really intense. That hospital will require you to have gone through your institution's ethical clearance process, to know that at least you're going to follow some basic rules. And there's a lot, and yes, they do suspect you of spying, because that's what you're doing. You just have to convince them that you're going to be ethical in what you do with that information. A lot of that information, a lot of ethics deals with what are you going to do with the information, the raw data? Are you keeping it? Are you destroying it? Because you've got to keep the data for 5 years to prove that you haven't falsified. But somebody else shouldn't get access to that at all. There should be no damage. We'll get to that now. So that access is really, really difficult.
Dr. Rio, can I ask a question? What if, let me just say that you're doing research in a government department or an organization and they have their own research committee?
Yes, very often you get multiple, you might, and that research committee applying to, say if you apply in a university and it's a specific environment, any medical environment, any company will have to have permission to participate. Now that organization, as was said, that organization may have a variety of forms that they go through clearance. Some of them may have clearance processes that includes ethical clearance for your research, and your institution will certainly not give you ethical clearance unless you have ethical clearance for wherever it's happening. Sometimes they would say, yes, you may do that, pending ethical clearance from your institution. So there's a little bit of a catch-22 situation depending on how the organization works. But unless you've got that clearance, unless you've got the permission from the guys, typically they might say something that, pending full ethical clearance at your organization, you may do that. But smaller organizations may not do that. And government departments, for certain, there's a number of them that are really not going to be welcoming students doing research into their areas, because they don't want this to be published in the end. Because remember, your research, when you hand it in, it belongs to the university. And it can get published. And it's open. A lot of your work is being paid for by the public of South Africa through taxes. So it's going to be published. And some of the guys might not want this to be published.
Then at the end, who's going to own the data? Is it, let me just say you're doing a research in the
university. The university. The university owns the data, but it's important is that in your ethical process you have to say how you're going to handle the data. Is it going to be accessible? Is it going to be secure? Is it going to be linked? Are you going to be able to guarantee privacy? What's going to happen? We'll get to that data. But that's the reality of it. And that's why organizations, even if you think, but it's logical, they should allow me, they may not allow you access. And in your whole phrasing of your research problem, it's important to understand pragmatically what is it about. And if you can't get the data, you can't do the research, even if it's great research, even if it's got beautiful literature reviews, perfectly scoped. You know, you can't get the data, you can't do the research.
I don't know, ma'am. Is it possible to get intervention from the university in case you
Yes.
get access?
There is, no, there's no intervention, but we'll get to that now. There's an introduction letter. Okay? There is a formal letter that you describe the research, and it's typically put on the university's letterhead. It could be signed at a department level, at a master's and a doctorate level. It's certainly signed at least the faculty level. And it states that this will be done in accordance with the ethical procedures of this university. And that, of course, is already convincing them that you're legitimate and there's some oversight in what you do. So that you get. But they can't tell them they must tell you. That's coercion, and coercion, you'll see later, is also not possible. So, yeah?
Is it coercion then when you convince them with that introduction letter that they're also going to benefit? Yes.
No, that's not coercion. That is perfectly acceptable, especially the fact that you have to actually reveal your results, your findings to them, but not say the detail, not information that can cause harm. And a lot of those guys might put pressure on you to say, okay, if you get this information, we want the data.
Because that's one challenge I think I'm going to face at the end, that the organization or the department that I'm going to do research, I think they're going to want the whole information.
Yeah, but then they should, that's what you have to say, that it will be according to ethical clearance, and it will not be released. Issues of confidentiality will not. If it's according to the protocol, you may not, you've committed that you're not going to do it. If you do it, the consequences for both you and the institution can be massive. It's really, it can be really, really serious. So this is a commitment you make, this is a commitment the university makes. And if a university breaks it, the consequences could be serious. It's legal, reputationally, certainly. Nobody else is going to allow the university to do research anymore if it has proven that it breaks confidentiality. I've got the guy up there is...
Sorry, I must just say, I think in this country there's serious paranoia about information sharing, especially from government. You see, there's a serious paranoia, I must just be honest about it. Because seriously, I think the problem is such that maybe we're not doing enough to share the benefits of the research with them. Because I think they might be willing to assist you if you say, there's a similar research done in another institution, here is it. It assisted them in A, B, and C.
Yeah, that is what that is what your introduction letter's purpose is. I haven't got the introduction letter here, but I can look, maybe I have one that tells you what you do. But typically it states, the work is being done here. This is the way, this is a purpose. We'll go through now. Some of the requirements in ethical research is that it's grounded on solid knowledge. You can't just go and find it out because you're having fun. It must be beneficence. We'll go through those now. But access is not something to just to think that you're going to get it. It's a major part of your research planning.
What happens is you're working through your research, you are communicating or trying to gain access to certain places where you think you're going to get your primary data. And you're getting an indication that, it's going to be okay. And all of a sudden, when you reach that stage, the people are either gone or all of a sudden they change their mind.
That's something that you have to manage continuously. That is a big risk. So for you, when you phrase your research from the beginning, be sensible. Remember that you've got to get access. Don't try and phrase research that will be problematic for you. A lot of people, I know a number of supervisors prefer you working from secondary data in the public domain. That's a lowest risk form. It's certainly not the most interesting research. It's going to be really, really difficult to do research that has a right contribution at doctoral level there. But there are risks. And you have to manage the risks, and you manage the risks from the beginning by scoping your problem area where you need access to somebody that you can use that. Okay. Keep it in mind every step of the way, because that is the nastiest thing. And you don't want to be 2/3 down the way and find out, oops, your whole data set has gone leaving somebody, or they've died, or whatever. And if you're really doing a lot of phenomenological research, you might work with single people. And that might be disgusting enough to go and die in the middle of your research. And sad luck, that's it, you've got to start again. It does happen.
So, if I can just add there, the university will assist you by giving you an introduction letter, and especially if your work insists on that, we will generate that for you. But for you as the student, it is your responsibility that you get in writing permission at the right level of the organization. Because if you have it in writing at the correct level of the organization, the chances of that minimizes your risk. Okay, so if your direct boss only gives you permission and he disappears, then that becomes problematic.
Does he have the legal ability? Remember that broker, do they have the ability?
So just make sure, because at the end of the day, that minimizes your risk.
Okay, so the reasons that access get denied is often around perceived value, and it's also around potential sensitivity. And that's where the governments tend to be really tense. Around confidentiality, competition, and undesirable public attention. Probably one of the most difficult thing to do. I've had one student that worked on information, had to gather information from the military environment. It was probably one of the more painful experiences in information gathering that I had. And the most entertaining bit of it was actually going through the items in the questionnaire that they didn't want to be asked, because that clearly showed what they regarded as sensitive. I found it entertaining. I'm not sure if... But then I have this very, very serious view about military intelligence, and it's not a positive view either. So, but it's very important. It's oxymoron. There's continuing access. Yeah?
I'm not sure whether this is a sensitive question. Within academics themselves, how open are they? You mentioned something about parallel sharing information. How open are they? Because, for instance, my information that I'm going to be gathered, and we're probably working with institutions that have got social entrepreneur departments and units as using them as we part, and TUT doesn't have one of those like birds and
Yeah.
So the question is it, should I be preparing myself that they might have as gatekeepers, I might have face challenge, or should I automatically assume that they're academics in an academic That's actually the question that I want
The competition in academia is bad. Willingness to share depends on whether you trust a person, sometimes whether you like a person, sometimes you don't trust anybody. A lot of academics don't like people. It's one of those things. There's a lot of internal competition. Well, I know of a lot of academics that specifically hate students, especially sometimes of the year. You know, during exam time, I don't know of any academics that like students when they're marking. So there's a lot of issues around that. So be aware that you might have a gatekeeper. Sometimes your supervisor can access, has the credibility to access. And that always, or somebody around, but it takes a while to find those. And it will take time. Okay, the other thing is they might say you have access, but will you get a proper sample? yes, you can send interviews to our people, but they're not to be kept out, and it should be less than 5 minutes, and. You very often get that kind of barriers to how often you can only see a person for half an hour. That happens very often when you try to work with factory workers or with shop floor workers or guys, that you might be told by the company, listen, yes, you may ask them. Must happen during lunchtime, which means, of course, you must feed them or something, because otherwise they're just not going to talk to you, or something around that. But they can restrict your access to such a level that you will not be able to get enough information. So it's not only about getting the physical access, it's also do you have enough access to get enough information from them. Data gather.
I have this very weird question. What happens if you are in academia and they see sharing information with you, trying, to get some assistance,
Yeah.
and you have an upper hand because you're already there and I'm not yet there, and down the line, I Google and there's this wonderful article that has been written on my topic, and I realize it's you.
That is a very, very serious issue. It happens. It is not something that there's an understanding about. It's also around trust, and it very often happens. And that's the kind of thing that you put complaints and formal complaints against a person. Unfortunately, it's like any power. And unlike sexual harassment, that's basically the same, because that is mental abuse. It is serious. It's abusing your intellect. There's not too much legislation that supports you, and there is a power relationship there. It can happen. Nobody.
But surely the copyright laws would.
No, unless you've got it documented. When you start talking to them, it's worthwhile to put it on the paper, send emails. It's easier to talk to people, but putting it down on paper is a little bit evidence. I once had an occasion where I asked a young, she's now a doctor, student, to get me information on a certain topic. I worked in St. Parks at that point, one work. And she came back and she brought a piece of paper, a summary, in the font and style and the exact words that I use when I write briefing. I actually use a specific font when I write a briefing piece of information. And I gave that to one of the senior researchers, male researcher, that she probably that I can use that would be absolutely inappropriate to use because they're recording me. But you are. Okay. It is very difficult. That's why you put your things down in your communication. It does happen. There are academics that are dishonest. If you put a complaint, sometimes you put I know of people that have put a complaint. Of course, you make your own life difficult, but sometimes it's worth, putting things. Especially, there's beautiful evidence to the fact that Einstein's work was in fact produced by his wife. You don't know about that? Was produced by his wife. Sorry? In that age, they were probably married as a property, the wife being a property. But yeah.
She was probably his property.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. But it is unfortunately, that form of academic dishonesty does happen. But it happens everywhere you find people that misuse. They think the assistants belong to them body and soul and intellect. It's unfortunately not.
Don't they?
Huh? Don't they? No. Damn. I knew slavery shouldn't have been abolished. Yeah.
So then how do you prevent that to actually happen?
You make sure you communicate in writing. This kind of information comes out at a point, it comes into public. There's rumors around these guys. Some of the very senior academics you might find have those things, and they believe they're entitled. But the rumors drift around students. When you have that kind of person, be careful. You write it down. In any case, write it down. And practice, in any form of practice, it's much better to have a record of what your input was. So unfortunately. Okay. There's always a conflict between what is theoretically possible and what desirable and what you can do. Sometime, if you start dealing with longitudinal research, for example, you want to look at something, you want to do a sample now, every 6 months. At a doctoral level even, it's difficult to do full longitudinal research if you want to gain access every time. But certainly there's cases where you want to have information, see an intervention and see what's happening afterwards. That becomes the issue. You have to present yourself as an external researcher, that kind of permission, operating on behalf of the institute. So you are then trading on the credibility of the university. The university gives you a letter and states that you will be following it. They will ensure that you are following ethical procedures, which is really difficult. If you don't, then obviously the university is going to get your skin.
We have a special knife for that.
Yeah, sharp or blunt, it depends. Okay. One of the important things is that you've got to know the company. When you can't just try and appoint a person. It takes a while to find out who's who and what's who. You very often get to talk to people that tell you that they can get you access to anything. And then a little while later you find out in fact they can't. Okay. So you've got to learn, you've got to understand. Very often people send out blank letters to people listed, say, on a certain database. Is it appropriate? Will you get a response? How many of these emails do the people get? If you send a bulk email, does it just get blocked? Do their secretaries block them? I know of a person that has phoned every secretary and pretended to be a secretary of herself in order to set up appointments. That works quite efficient. Secretaries tend to be nicer to secretaries than to people they think are being snotty. So she went and she set up all those appointments, but she was setting that on behalf of. So, yeah, that's deception, but I think that is, one can understand that. I very often, when I need appointments, try and be my own secretary. It helps very often. But in any case, it takes a lot of time. It's not easy, it's not quick. You use your contacts, that's perfectly fine, but you have to just understand what's the implication, and that letter is important. Okay, access. Anybody wants to talk anything about access, or should we have a quick body break?
What part of your body can I break?
Yeah?
In terms of access, let's say for instance, there's a particular organization that they are granting access to their information.
Yeah.
In return of something. But then the problem, like when I'm working on my research, they feel like they have the power to channel.
We will talk about it, because when you are reporting, when you're applying for ethical clearance, there's a specific point where you have to declare potential conflict of interest. And that could be conflict of interest where they will try and influence your findings. So, oh, we don't like what your results are saying. Do you mind moving it like that, or you may no longer use our data? It happens. So it's really, you've got to be aware of this. You can't, it would be stupid to go into the game not understanding these rules.
But also, I think that when you ask for that introductory letter, you already should have an understanding of what the sensitive issues are, so that in the introductory letter your supervisor can say, there will be no company information made available, or any write-up will not include data that can pinpoint your organization if that's an issue.
Unless, for example, SA breweries fund research into the effects of alcohol. It's one of all the guys that produce cigarettes fund research into the effects of cigarettes. You can sort of note a little potential conflict of interest there, can't you? Okay. Your funders, and we'll get to that back later. Okay, take 5 minutes or so break. The EndNote people to come and link up. Research ethics is quite a messy area to work in. Very often you will find that specific departments have specific guidelines of what you look at, what you don't look at. In some disciplines there's a certain way. So what we will be doing is we will be looking at the background and where the ethics, the codes have developed from, so that we can base it. Remember, we said that the ethical code can change, and I'll show you how it's changed. Most of research ethics is based on medical ethics. That's probably where the most stringent processes have been put in place. Most of the learnings have occurred. That does not mean that you only apply ethics when there's medical issues. The underlying principles are consistently applied. So let's go through that. One of the things that I'm just going to mention 2 or 3 experiments that had a great effect, and you'll see later when it has. The Tuskegee syphilis studies started in 1932 and it was ended, very solidly ended, in 1972. What happened is that a group of researchers studied 600 African American males. Okay? These guys were said that they were being studied for what was called, they were called it, can't remember, there's a specific term, some general term of unwellness. Some of those were found, it's actually 598 or something like that. Some of these guys had syphilis. They were not told that they were had syphilis. They were not treated for syphilis. They were merely studied. They were watched as how they went mad, they were watched as how they died, and they were being studied continuously so that people can learn about syphilis and how syphilis kills something. When this came out, it caused a huge scandal. This kind of research happened. Okay? It's important to look at the dates. It started 1932 and it stopped at 72, and we'll go through that now. So when it started was before certain things which we'll discuss now happened. Another experiment, the Stanford prison experiment, which go and look, I think on the wiki, Professor Barry said that on that wiki there is specifically a YouTube thing about the experiment. Was done by a really, really highly accredited researcher at Stanford University, certainly not one of the bottom range universities. That professor wanted to find out about power, the role games. If people do role playing, how does it affect them? How do they live? How do they immerse? Different things around that. And what he did is he asked his students, okay, these male students, 24 2-week experiments, they would be paid because of course they would be out of sight, and they were randomly assigned to be either prisoners or guards. The guys that were assigned to be guards were picked up from their houses in the middle of the night in prison vans, put in a prison, and the guys that were guards were supposed to be their guards. Sounds fine. Unfortunately, within a few hours, problems started because the guys that were being guards were a little bit too enthusiastic about being guards. That you said the movies on your.
The video of the whole experiment is on the wiki under interesting research articles or interesting research sites.
Psychological stress and trauma, and the professor was happy. He didn't even realize what was happening because he was seeing all these wonderful data. He didn't stand back at any time, and that's one of the big things. You become involved in it. And in the end, his colleagues, this thing had to stop him. This thing has to stop. This is some real drama going on. And this is one of the very telling cases where this is a role playing. This shouldn't have any drama on people, should it? Should it have any consequences on people if you ask them, you go play a cop, you become a warden, you become a prisoner. But the situation itself became very bad. And we will talk about that when we look at the oversight committees. modern research ethics, if you want to call it that, started after the Second World War. After the war, there was a number of trials called the Nuremberg trials, the war crime trials. And one of the sections of the war crime trials was what was called the doctors' trials. And this was mostly about alleged medical experimentation done in the concentration camps, where people, among other things, they tried to work out how people die from exposure. So they took some of the guys in the concentration camps and dropped them into cold water and see how they died. Well, they died. Okay, and they had all kinds of experiments, medical experiments about transplanting organs, a variety of things. And these guys were found guilty, but from that a code was established which was called the 10, basically the 10 things. Let me go through that. I wanted to just make sure that I read it. It's such a long thing, I can't post it over. Oh, damn. Okay. Basically, it went around voluntary consent. Whoever participates in that has to give voluntary consent, and we'll go through what voluntary consent. So they must admit that they want to, and they could stop at any time. The second requirement is that the experiment should be so that it yields fruitful results. So you don't do research on something that is not going to be useful or meaningful. In your research proposal, when you apply for ethics, you have to prove that you know what this is going to do, that there is going to be meaningful results obtained. So you can't do experiments unless it should be designed and based on solid knowledge, either theoretical knowledge or animal experimentation or some form of experimentation that proves that it's got a very high likelihood of working. In your research proposal, you have to prove that whatever item you ask, that it's based on some theoretical knowledge. It has to be, there should be no unnecessary physical or mental suffering or injury. In fact, preferably none. Now, there should be no experiments where there's prior reason to think that death or disabling injury would occur. And that includes the people. And it includes the experiments where medical people experiment on themselves. Very often you'll find out that certain medical researchers took their own medicine to try and work it out because they couldn't use it anybody else. That's also illegal. The degree of risk should never be more than whatever benefit could happen. There should be proper experimentation and adequate facilities provided. The experiment should only be conducted by scientifically qualified people. So whatever research you do, say for those of you that are looking in HR, if you're doing work that is around psychological issues and you could cause people, just in talking to you, they could become traumatized or remember something, you may not do that research unless you're a qualified research psychologist, because you need to be able to give counseling over it. There's a lot of that around. Whether you can do that professionally, it's something that happens. People should be able to withdraw from an experiment at any time, and the person in charge should also have the ability to stop it at any time when he thinks that or she thinks that there's damage. Very basic principles. Before that time, remember the syphilis trial that we spoke, the syphilis experiment that we spoke about, started in 1932. This code was established in 1947. And although that sounds very extreme for the kind of research that you're going to do, these principles underlie everything. And in fact, the next lot is the Helsinki Code, which was done by the World Health Organization, where people came together and tried to establish codes for research. Everything was based on the 10 principles from Nuremberg, but in 1964, there was a whole group of people together and they started codifying research ethics principles. Basically the same 10 principles, except that the first thing that they changed is they said that it doesn't have to be you that give informed consent, a legal guardian could also give informed consent. Okay? So that was the first thing. It was put together. We'll talk to the revisions now, but people have updated as time goes by and more things was found. It was updated. I think it's now at revision 6 or so. But the American people, the American government, the American medical companies, anything, don't accept anything from revision 4 onwards. And we'll go through why they haven't accepted it either. So there are standard. If you're a research psychologist and you're registered on the medical, as a medical professional, any one of you nurses, anybody as a medical professional, when you do research and you violate these research principles, you can get kicked off the roll. So it is supposed to be only morally binding, but if you violate that, remember the whole Wouter-Besson trials, that is basically on which, the grounds on which he is being trialed. But underlying everything else, those principles still there. But it's not always translated into the variety of areas. Now in some cases, say for example, you're working with just getting information from a company, the fact that you may use that information to damage the company, such as the government departments may believe, cause harm to the company. So the interpretation is cause no harm is not only to the person, it's to whoever you're studying. So the basic principles are being translated. Okay, in 1964, it was about the proxy consent. Then in 1975 was the next major review, and it was made necessary that there is an oversight committee. You'll find that this is strangely, this is basically what happened at the Stanford experiment, what was the issue there as well, that there should be a committee that's absolutely neutral, not involved, that should look over that research, especially if it's ongoing research. So you have to, in many cases, in your ethical process, one of your processes, one of the things that you put in place may be that you will review the findings to make sure that it is still okay as the process continues. Then what happens, there was experiments done in Africa on HIV medication, mother to child transmission. The group that received the medication was in America. The group that received the placebo was in Africa, 70% success rate. The people in Africa were also being told they were treated. So after that, and a number of those kind of incidents, it was recommended that they change this code to say that whenever a good treatment, there's a chance of success, you may not, placebos have to be meaningful. You can't go around offering people placebos if something exists that's better. And a big drama around that. And it went on from there, but at that point in time, the Americans decided they no longer like this game. Okay? They're not going to look at any further revisions, and if you look at all medical research, it follows ethical procedures, but it really doesn't like that business about treating Americans, not treating Americans the best, and not trialing out some medication in third world countries. There's also an issue that if there's a better treatment, why should you trial something with a placebo that they will be denying better treatment? Later issues came in that if you've treated people, if you've given them a certain service, you cannot take it away later. So the Helsinki conference, the conventions are being developed, but a lot of people for their own interest no longer applies these rules. So if you look at the APA or the American Psychology guidelines around ethics, it's very, very strong, but it only looks up to its 4th level. Now remember the whole thing, is it no harm whatsoever, or is there acceptable risks? That's the first bit that we looked at. And if you look at from the American perspective, the American medical perspective, there are certain consequences one can take. Sometimes it's to the better. But we're not going to make any moral judgments on that. The basic thing is there's some underlying principles. And all of the principles, all of the things you have to look at has to be taken in light of these kind of harms. Now, it may not appear to you that there's massive harm if you send bad reputation things into the public domain that really damages a company, but that company can go bankrupt and people can lose their jobs. You might be asking people about some experience, suddenly that person has a flashback, total nervous breakdown, gone. So there's a whole lot of damage that it's very difficult to consider at an early level. First thing is integrity. Underlying this, honesty and truth, which we've spoken about. The next one is respect. Respect for yourself, respect for your colleagues, respect for whoever you're doing research on. Benefit. There must be benefit. It comes from the Nuremberg. If there's no benefit, there should be no reason to do it. There should be no deliberate harm. Okay? There's a responsibility and accountability for everything. There must be scientific validity. You can't go around doing something if you have no scientific validity for doing it. There's got to be peer review of both the process. There has to be justice. And the last few things were really around social justice and responsibility. And there's got to be academic freedom about dissemination. So whoever's funded it can't go and force it around. Which sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Okay. Now the big problem is ethical committees, and we'll go to it. Ethical committees in universities are the most horrifying things to get your research passed through. Because on that committee, there will be people that could take decisions and that could have professional damage to them. If somebody is a research psychologist, registered, approves the process as ethically sound, and it's proved to be not ethically sound, they face serious consequences. Okay. And people sit there and everybody's got his own opinion. And ethical practice went a little bit differently in each field of study. The anthropologist has a very, very strong history of understanding that there could be damage to the researcher themselves. Now, if they don't take proper precaution, they can end up in a pot and get eaten. So look after them. If you look at a lot of chemical or physics research, there's a lot of occupational health and safety issues. So certain forms of research have gone certain ways. But if you look at it overall from a university point, there is massive, massive risk to the university. One of the main things is funding. International funders, the people that fund the university, do not want to give funding to somebody that's behaving unethically because it affects them as well. Suddenly, these guys, Mellon Foundation in America, have funded unethical research in Africa. Maybe a little small project that somebody did, but that's the way it can be presented. There's also ethical, serious issues for the university. Study at TUT found. Okay, now who of you have read the last week's little fun and games about what happened at UCT? Have you?
The research about the beauty.
Research about the beauty. Okay. It hit the front pages. It hit the international pages. Research at UCT. What was done? Was it cleared? Was it official research or anything? There was a few students that put a few questions together, thought it was interesting. And it was funny. There was nothing, but it wasn't properly designed. There was no question. I mean, what is beauty? Close your eyes and tell me what makes any person attractive. Late during the party, I mean, we're talking about young students there, not more mature students. So approximately 9 o'clock in a party, what is attractive is availability. Very little else. Okay. So what questions, what items did you ask? What is the underlying legitimacy, academic validity of the questions you ask? If you say attractive, what do you mean by attractive? Okay. So there's a lot of questions around it, but the consequences to UCT was massive. The consequences from the funders, at the moment, some of the top funders are asking nasty letters, millions not being available. It is really, really very serious. So you're starting to look with something, and you look at research done here, a master's student asks a few questions, somebody asks you that runs a newspaper, hits the Mail and Guardian about who's talking to any municipality. Some straightforward, fairly innocent question, pulled totally out of context, hits the Mail and Guardian, and down comes the ANC closing TUT. I mean, does it sound extreme? You know, it's also possible. So there's a lot of consequences to the university itself. So it takes it very, very seriously, and the processes are painful and thorough and sometimes sound ridiculous. But the fact is, if you violate research ethics in any small area, overall it doesn't go whether you've violated the ethics by beating somebody over the head repeatedly to see how they react or asking nasty questions to them. You've still violated research ethics. So there's not much of a degree issue here. It either passes it or it don't pass it. One of the big problems is that the ethics forms that you end up filling in, if it's about a 10-page form, you need a 100-page guideline, because nobody really goes from it to say, these are the underlying principles. So whatever you are doing is matched against, is there damage? Did people have informed consent? It's not only put informed consent, there are certain ethical concerns in your research. Okay? And you've got to put things in place to sort that. Now, who has not had an opportunity to share their thoughts? Okay, far back. What is your research? At what level are you? What's your research? And what you're going to do? Sorry? Doctorate?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm looking at the critical success factors for the implementation of the projects in a community, rural community environment.
Okay. Now you're looking, where are you going to ask the questions? What are you going to do?
I'm going to establish a focus group first, and the output of the focus group, I will then take it to...
Who's your focus group?
Yeah.
Who's your focus?
Sorry?
Who's going to be the focus group?
Local experts, especially within the project environment, those participating.
Okay. Are you going to choose a specific project environment, a specific company?
It's a specific project environment in a certain village.
Okay, so yeah, you're already dealing with the villages, the local community issues, which could be sensitive. You're talking about specific company. Now, is this company that implemented their one owned by Mr. Malema?
No.
I mean, there's a whole lot, and this is now extreme case, but there's a whole lot of implications. You're starting to look at some guys, and you're talking about failures of specific projects owned by specific people. What's going to happen if these things come out? Is it going to be around toilets? What's the drama that's going to hit? I mean, there's so much that can go wrong about information that you send into the public domain about project failures. So it doesn't sound like an ethically serious question, isn't it? But there's a lot that can go wrong. There's a really serious lot that can go wrong. Okay. In the middle, talk about your project.
It's about technology change.
Yeah.
And the question that I'm asking is if there is a structured, robust process followed in manufacturing,
Mm-hmm.
in new product development, in all sectors of manufacturing and service departments.
Okay, that sounds okay, doesn't it? Sounds fine. Where are you going to ask the questions?
Manufacturing and service companies.
Which companies? How many of them? Have you got access? Are you going to compare them? Who's going to say? What's going to happen if you interview a guy that reports to executive that thinks everything is perfect, and this guy says, you know what, this guy smokes his socks. Actually, it is so messy and so unsuccessful here, it's just not true. And the second guy says it, and the third guy says it. What happens then? So it sounds okay, but there is now this whole thing. What happens if I say something about my company or my boss that's really negative and they find out exactly who said what? There could be serious consequences, couldn't there? Yes?
The very same question you're asking, in my case, if you go to the Department of Labor to go and get the retention policy of their management position,
Yeah.
and you're also going to get information from the different hospitals that is targeted,
Yeah.
what if the policies are there but not being implemented by them in hospitals?
Yes. But you want to know that. That's what you want to know. But you must somehow put things in place so that the poor people that tell you, no, it's not put in place, can't suffer consequences. You know, that's very, very, very important. I'm doing some work at UJ at the moment. We're looking at supervisory practices. We're looking at it from academic management perspective. We're looking at it from the supervisor's perspective. And we're looking from the student perspectives. But one of the issues is we want to ask supervisors, you know, these academic managers claim that this is what they do, this is what they do, and this is what they do. Do they really do that? How well are these processes followed? Now, in a small department where there's maybe 3 or 4 people that could possibly be supervisors, if those guys are honest, it's very easy to work out who it is in that mentioned. So for example, I tell you, a large beer manufacturing company in South Africa.
SABS.
Yeah. You know who it is?
SAB.
SAB. What happens if you ask those questions? What are you going to do? In this case, I have to aggregate the questions. In some questions, I'm separating the questionnaires. Some questions I want to know in which department they are. And in some questions, I only want to know in which faculty they are to be able to protect the people. So there's a variety of things that can go wrong that you really, really don't think of so quickly. If you were looking at support in a rural community, you put some support in for the guys. For the 6 months that you're there, the support is there. Then you leave and you take everything away. And if you look at some of the things that was done in the later versions of the Helsinki Protocol, that's what is going on. If you put something in place, you can't take it away again. There's no justice in that. So it would appear that some areas are pretty solid, but underlying there are concerns that could have really serious consequences. And it's very difficult for you to work out what it is that you're going to deal with. The Senate has the power, so it's delegated in appropriate ways. The intention is to avoid harm to the research subjects, people, or the companies, the researcher themselves, and to the university. Okay. There's the ethics clearance.
If I can just say something here. So when you go through the ethics process and you get feedback, and the first reaction that one always has is, oh, but this is ridiculous. Don't have that reaction. Be thankful that someone is taking the time and the trouble to go through your research and actually give you feedback. Right. And take their concerns seriously, because the people that sit on the ethics committee of the university are very experienced.
And are nitpicking bastards.
Yes, they are nitpicking bastards, but it's for a reason.
Okay.
So just try and see it as a positive experience and try and learn out of that. Yes, I know, I've been there. It's not nice when they tell you, but you can't ask this question. All right. And you feel it's a personal attack and all this kind of nonsense. But just be thankful that somebody is helping you not to make these mistakes.
It's also very important to note how long it can take.
Yes.
If you're applying for medical clearance, you are not going to finish your clearance process within a year. So, you've done your proposal development, because your proposal, all your instruments have to be developed to ask for clearance. You may not start gathering data until you've got the clearance. That's it. So here you sit. And that's when you write your paper on the literature or something like that to just be meaningfully occupied. But it really takes a very long time. And I know of cases where, and that was in the engineering faculty at WITS, where when somebody started, it wasn't necessary to get clearance. She did work in prisons, on building material in prisons. Fortunately, she got clearance from the prison, because when a thesis was due to be handed in for examination, but, oh, sorry, not going into examination until you've got clearance. Now, what happens? You've done all the work, and suddenly, everything that you've done is presented, and they say, no, this wasn't good enough. Does it mean you've got to regather your data? Does it mean there's any consequences? So it's much better to follow the safe route here and be as stringent as possible on yourself than to try and have this come back. Because this is something that is really, really serious and can get you to fail your thesis. Okay.
And it's very hard to do in retrospect.
Yeah, if you've done it. So, if we look at the process, I'm going to now go into detail. This was a nasty background. As by now you know, I don't really pull punches. I'm not trying to make things look pretty. This is the reality. So what we're going to do is this process focus on putting together your proposal. Your initial proposal is not the final thing that you put into ethics, but we are going to make you fill out a lot of documentation, and we're going to make you take a lot of ethics issues into account all the way. When you have your proposal, and it has gone through that first little presentation, you probably see those days that you're going to come in your department, the departments are going to sit together, you're going to present your proposal, everybody's going to say something. That's before you go to the faculty. That's for your own benefit, so that it's gone through and it's checked and everybody gives you feedback. Then you go to the faculty and you get some more information. What you need to do then is you have to include whatever feedback you've got, update your proposal. Then you have to complete your instruments. We're going to talk about instrument design. But every questionnaire, everything has to be there. You've got to complete your protocols. Then you have to complete the forms around the information, the permission documentation, informed consent, whatever you're going to use. And you put the ethics application form and you put it together and you apply for ethical clearance. And only at the time that you receive the stamped ethical clearance thing from the university, which may take 1 or 2 iterations, and typically ethics committees meet once a month, so you hand it in. You've got to hand it in at least 2-3 weeks in advance, because somebody's got to read through everything. Okay, then it sits there and it takes a while everybody think about it, and then you get a little document back that says maybe not, and you don't know where it is. And then you try again, and you try again, and you try again. It's always worthwhile that before you hand in, especially at doctoral level, before you hand in your ethics application, you have a little meeting with whoever sits on the ethics committee, so they can give you some guidance of what is being considered. That's not being cheating. That's just making sure you know the rules, because those rules appear to be very, very different. Unless you understand the basics behind why these things, it might sound utterly, utterly ridiculous. Okay. One of the things, who of you are going to ask children, talk to children? Okay. Okay. Children. Students are also vulnerable people. Students are people. Students are vulnerable people, and if I do research on any group that I teach to, they're vulnerable. I have a power position over them. I can sit here and say, there's the forms. Okay, guys, hand in before you leave the class. That's coercion, isn't it? Okay. So it's very, very, when you deal with students, when you deal with children, when you deal with aged people, when you deal with people with disabilities, there's some serious concerns around, is it voluntary participation? Remember, voluntary, they can leave at any time, or is it not? And it sounds ridiculous, but unfortunately, the consequences could be really, really bad.
For example, if it's class,
Okay, that's 2 or 3 little questions together. The first thing is, Just because it's a concern doesn't mean you can't do it. What you have to have then is the informed consent. What you have to there is to protect anonymity. What you have to have, so you can ask people that, but for example, your questionnaires have to be designed so that nobody can find out who said it. You may have to code your information. In some cases, you have to state that you're going to destroy the original data. So for all of these things, it doesn't mean you can't do it. Please don't think that information with potential concerns is out of the way. You can do it. You just have to put processes in place. And what the ethics committee checks is that your processes are good. If you look at children, are you going to talk, what children are you going to deal with?
My area is outdoor recreation, so it's children at campsites, camping.
Okay. In that case, remember, you've got to have the legal guardian. It's been changed slightly in one of the conventions, I think Helsinki Convention 3, where it has to be an adult. Okay? So in that case, when you do that, you have to typically have permission from the legal guardian or parent. And you have to have that signed. Okay. What children are those? From what schools?
All over the country.
Now you sit and you want to get the permission from a parent in a rural school. Okay. And you send them a beautifully crafted letter.
With very nice big words.
Big words, and you don't know if they're literate. Is that informed consent? It's not informed. So part of the process would then be in what words are you using, in what way you're getting that consent. Do you have it recorded? What happens if you're dealing with people that are not literate? Sometimes you read it, and that was then, I'll get to the protocol now, then your protocol say, I will read the informed consent and give people the opportunity to leave if they do not want to participate. By continuing with this process, and you read that, and this is what you follow, consent will be indicated. Because you don't want them to sign their names either, because that's the way to to actually work out who has responded. That also deals with something around the anonymity. So that's a one bit. So it's about getting that informed consent. The next one which you measured is overstepping the law. Okay. If you are aware of a person doing a criminal activity or having done a criminal activity and you do not report it, you are of course guilty as well. You know that part of the law? Okay. So please do not put yourself into a position where you become a criminal. So when you start looking at that, you may want to make absolutely sure that there's not a way on earth that you can find out. Or phrase it. If you think about it, do you think that it's possible that this procedure is not always followed? You know, it deals with protecting yourself in that case. You don't want to become a criminal by giving certain questionnaires out.
Then on the other side, with regard to recycling, if you go and you step into someone's office and you speak to them about recycling, or you ask them these questions, if they've implemented it, they would know what you're talking about. If they don't have any idea what you're talking about, then you're going to know that they don't know what they're
Not always, and a lot of that time then becomes in vocabulary. You put together a questionnaire in English. Okay? One of the reasons you do a pilot study is to check that people understand what you say. Okay. Very often when you use specialists, it's not only that, a lot of the guys, when you use specialist information, do people really understand what you're saying? So it's making that accessible. Now you also sit in a case where very often you're going to work with people from multiple languages. In that case, you might end up having to translate and verify your questionnaires in every appropriate language. Okay. So, because you can't then go around saying, I'm going to exclude everybody that can't speak English, because you've no longer done random sampling and you're discriminating. So that becomes the issue as well. Also, if you look at that recording, I've had one student that collected information and did content analysis in Swahili and in English. Swahili is a very flowery language. It uses much more expansive words, and the English guys is much more a calmer language. So if you try and compare words, you can't pick out in Swahili a word that is much stronger and compare it with a word that is not so strong in English. So that had to be translated by an official translator, signed off into the appropriate tonal level. So language is a really, really funny business.
If you are doing a questionnaire that's electronic on SurveyMonkey, for example, and on the first page you say, you know, your ethics will be protected, your identity will be protected, etc., etc., and you then say yes, click here to say yes, I consent, or no, I don't consent. Would that be sufficient?
That's sufficient, because that is informed consent. As long as what you're informing them about is the right thing, is true. Okay, but so informed consent is both being really informed and really giving consent, and then being able to withdraw at any time. A person may withdraw at any time from the whole process without any consequences. So that's got to be very careful. So when you put that application through, it is really painful, but what it actually requires, you've got to have your proposal fully. Remember, yeah?
I just want to ask a question relating to these consent issues.
Yeah.
If, for example, you do other research after you got your qualification and you publish on the issue, and you really want to add value to the industry, so now you want to look at other issues which you are all connected to this big picture that you're busy with. If you do secondary research, and there are also questionnaires that's in play there.
Yeah.
What is the process there? Is it the same thing? Do they all go through this ethics committee?
If you're at a university and you're doing any research project, any and every research project that you consider publication on, will have to go through the clearance. No reputable journal will accept any publication unless there's a clear statement and evidence to the effect that this research has been done executed in an ethical manner. Okay, so it is unfortunately it.
So I mean, if you are in my situation where I am doing research, I also have to submit a proposal just like you guys have, and I also have to take my ethical clearance to the FHPC, and I also have them sending back my questionnaire that happened to me this year, and I had to update my questionnaire, and in fact you guys are busy completing that questionnaire for me.
So there's a situation of, you know what, this will be really interesting to look at the following. After you've published now, this is now secondary issues. It would be really nice and to investigate the following and get a questionnaire out there. There's a formal process each time with this whole thing.
Yeah. And if you then start harvesting your information for commercial gain afterwards, that's also unethical. Okay. So you have this feedback, you're going through the process, you have your feedback. Then you have to do your instruments. An instrument means in a questionnaire, every item is listed. In a structured interview, every item is defended and supported. You know exactly what information you're going to gather. That is not good enough. You also have to have your protocol. There is certain things. So just giving a person a document with informed consent, you've got your access permission, you've got your informed consent documentation and your instrument. That doesn't tell you that the work or the information is being gathered ethically. You have to have a protocol where you say, I am going to interview people coming from a shopping center. I am going to stand there and I'm going to go there in order to get a complete set of information. I'm going to go there on a Saturday morning, 2 week mornings, 2 week afternoons, and a Sunday morning to get a proper. When I'm there, I am going to approach every third person. Well, there's a group of us with a group of people. They will be read the information, they will be asked if they consent. If they consent, they will complete the interview and it will be collected. Very detailed exactly what's happening. And very often, a lot of the ethical behavior is how you execute the work and not only in the instrument itself. That's the protocols. Okay. And your detailed protocols also make it possible for people to look whether that information is in fact usable and if you can carry on with it. Selection of your participations, handling of data, what you do with it is important. If you start looking at informed, it's voluntary withdrawal and the documented consent in some way, either documented because you filled out a form or documented because the form itself is completed. This is all added to the thing. Form. Okay. You will be given a rubric that we will use to evaluate your ethics application. In this rubric, we are suggesting that you at least look at the following questions. Up to now, it really looks as if I'm asking you magic stuff and you're going to really wade through that. But when you put your research together, you should be able to ask the following questions. Is this an issue? And if it's an issue, exactly how have you addressed it? Okay. Is it an issue? Does this research discriminate against participation by individuals or differentiate between participants on the grounds of gender, race, or ethnic group, whatever? It may be that you want to have the opinion of young females. Then of course it's going to discriminate. Okay? So it doesn't say it shouldn't do that. It's just if it does that, how are you going to handle it and what are you going to do about it? Are you reporting? How are you reporting it? Does it require the participation of vulnerable people? Legally restricted groups, that's people in a prison or environments like that, it's very important. Will you be able to obtain the consent of their guardians? Will there be confidential data? How will you keep it? How will you destroy it? In your reporting, is there any chance that you will have anything, having anything with anonymity be made available? Are there foreseeable risk of physical, emotional, whatever damage? And is there any gifts? Nobody says no, it should be no. Nobody says the answer should be no. It should be, if the answer is yes, what are you going to do about it? Yes?
Are we talking about the degree of those things, for example, physical and psychological?
There's no degrees. The issue is, there is a risk of emotional damage. What I will do is I will have a professional, the interviews will be done by a professional psychology. Trauma counseling will be provided afterwards. So it's not, you don't have to have no answers. You just have to know there is an issue, what am I going to do about it? If there's issues around anonymity, what am I going to do about it? The next one is once again also a summary. These things are not complete, but these are the basic things that if you go through that, probably you've covered everything in your field. This is not for medical. Are the community going to be part of it? Has this been addressed adequately? Will there be any benefits that's taken away? Or will the service be provided at a below acceptable standard? This is also now linked to the medical research where people are saying, if an alternative medication or medical treatment is available, you are not allowed to give them a placebo that would reduce their access to proper medication. Conflict of interest. This is a big thing, and that's where people very often think there's no ethical issues. Is there any existing or potential conflict of interest between a research sponsor, academic supervisor, or between the supervisors, other researchers or participants? Especially where your sponsor may have another issue. Will the information that reveals the identity of the participants be supplied to anybody? Okay. This is not where you get a database that you can sell to somebody else. Okay. Does the proposed research, and that's the very nasty one, If it conflicts with other research within the university, it can be denied because you might damage the research of somebody else that's already busy with it. You're going to muddy their water, you're going to ask questions, it's going to cause problems for that research. That's also a reason for research to be denied. Then occupational health and safety. Are you going to be safe? Okay. Is there safety risk? Is there occupational health risks or emotional risks? Okay. This is just the applications. Any questions? I know this, it got a bit boring at the end. No. Should be scary. It will be, Annexure A is just your whole proposal. Annexure A is your proposal. The other annexures are just summaries of what is in there so that people don't have to wade through your document. Typically what happens, you read through the proposal and you read if the guy actually understood it. The reason for going through this is to make sure you've addressed it. It's not hunt and seek and tell you what to do. You have to, if any one of these issues are present, what are you going to do to see that it causes no harm? Exciting, happiness. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.